Capitol have defiled the seat of American democracy.
In a video produced by the White House, President Trump last night finally condemned the violence carried out in his name.
You do not represent our country.
But this is what the president said the day before.
We love you. You're very special.
And what he said at his rally before the assault on the Capitol may be investigated by U.S. attorneys for leading to the violence.
We're going to walk down to the Capitol, and we're going to cheer on our brave senators and congressmen and women, and we're probably not going to be cheering so much for some of them.
The president is also now falsely claiming he immediately deployed the National Guard to stop the attack on the Capitol. He did not. The violence went on for hours, and the Guard only arrived after Vice President Mike Pence got involved. Mr. Pence, who the president is attacking for not trying to change the election result, did not come to the White House Thursday. CBS News has learned the two men are barely speaking to each other. At least 7 White House officials have now resigned in protest, plus 2 members of the cabinet, Education Secretary Betsy DeVos and Secretary of Transportation Elaine Chao. She is married to Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell. And former Attorney General Bill Barr, who left the administration just last month, delivered a blistering rebuke, saying in a statement that orchestrating a mob to pressure Congress is inexcusable and calling the president's conduct a betrayal of his office.
A new administration will be inaugurated on January 20th.
President Trump appears to finally be resigned to the fact, after 2 months, that President-elect Biden will be sworn in after misleading his supporters about false allegations that the election was stolen.
My focus now turns to ensuring a smooth, orderly, and seamless transition of power.
And CBS News White House correspondent Ben Tracy joins me now with more. Hi, Ben. Put this into perspective for us. How unusual is it for an American president to skip the inauguration of their successor?
It's very unusual. It's only happened 3 times in American history, and the last time was 152 years ago. You got to go all the way back to Andrew Johnson when he skipped the inauguration of Ulysses S. Grant in 1869. So this is not something that we have seen a lot of. There are some parallels to the Johnson case, actually. The 2 men, Johnson and Grant, they hated each other. Johnson was an impeached president. So you do see some similarities there. However, in recent history, this is just unheard of. And think back to the last time we went through this 4 years ago. You had the sitting president, Barack Obama, who invited Donald Trump here to the White House and then rode with him in a limousine to the Capitol, even though almost President Trump at that point, had spent years trying to delegitimize President Obama. But President Trump making it very clear today on Twitter he does not intend to sit up there during the inauguration of his successor.
Let's talk a little bit about policy as President Trump leaves. He has, spent the last 2 months personally focused on overturning his election loss, even as at the same time his administration continued to tighten immigration and loosen certain environmental rules. Do we know how Mr. Trump wants to use his final 2 weeks in office?
A lot of that technical work is done, these changing of rules and things that they're trying to lock in before he leaves office, although most of what they have done in recent weeks can simply be undone by the incoming Biden administration. I would not expect a whole lot of that to go on for the next 2 weeks because, frankly, a lot of the president's staff is departing as you normally would at this point of a transition, but also because there are now this steady stream of resignations happening here at the White House. So in terms of what the president may do, we should give the caveat that on any given day we really have no idea what he's going to do. But there are some talk that he might go to the border wall down in Texas for one final domestic trip next week. But you should expect some pardons. He still has that power. And you should also expect him to continue to reward and award people that he cares about with the Presidential Medal of Freedom. One of those ceremonies is scheduled for this coming Monday, where he's going to give that to Congressman Jim Jordan, who's been a staunch supporter of the president on Capitol Hill. Besides that, expect a lot of tweets now that the president has his Twitter feed back and working.
And so, Ben, with this public admission that his time in office is ending, the election does still appear to be a sore spot for the president. Do we know anything more about his future political plans?
Well, the president said in his video message that he's committed to this smooth transition of power. So we'll have to see how that plays out in the coming days, if that was just a one-off speech or if the president is really committed to that. But after he leaves here, I think it's really a wild card now. There was a lot of speculation that the president would go down to Florida either the day of the inauguration or the day before and hold a big rally and perhaps even announce that he's going to run again for 2024, or at least tease that pretty heavily. I think the events the last 48 hours have changed things dramatically. He is now becoming increasingly toxic in his own party. We're actually seeing pushback online from his own supporters who think that he has now thrown them under the bus with that video message that he put out last night, basically condemning what they did, even though he's the one who kind of instigated a lot of that. So I think we have to see what happens in the next couple of days to really know what his political future is. He did leave the door wide open. He said at the end of that message that our incredible journey has just begun. So I don't think he intends to go down to Mar-a-Lago and lock himself away and just play golf for the next couple of years. I think he plans to try to remain relevant. The question is whether or not he can.
Right. All right. Well, Ben Tracy at the White House, thank you so much.
Thanks.
Pressure is growing on President Trump to resign after Wednesday's act of domestic terrorism on the Capitol. Some of Mr. Trump's most ardent defenders in the media are backing those calls. The Wall Street Journal's editorial board said the president should step down now to, quote, spare the U.S. another impeachment fight. But that could be where the country is headed. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi and Senate Democratic leader Chuck Schumer are both demanding Vice President Pence invoke the 25th Amendment to remove the president from office. If he refuses to act, impeachment is likely the next step. CBS News chief congressional correspondent Nancy Cordes has the latest from Capitol Hill.
This is urgent. This is emergency of the highest magnitude.
Calling President Trump dangerous, House Speaker Nancy Pelosi declared he should be removed following this week's insurrection at the Capitol. Democrats plan to talk today about a backup plan.
If the 25th Amendment isn't invoked, the next best thing is impeachment ASAP.
And it wasn't just Democrats. Illinois Republican Adam Kinzinger.
It's time to invoke the 25th Amendment and to end this nightmare. All indications are that the president has become unmoored, not just from his duty, nor even his oath, but from reality itself.
Other Republicans, like Senator Marco Rubio, called out their own GOP colleagues, saying they misled supporters by suggesting that the election results could be overturned.
Criminals are responsible for their own conduct.
Senator Ted Cruz rejected that accusation, though he did find fault with the president.
I think his angry rhetoric was reckless, and I think it was harmful.
But not harmful enough, allies say, to warrant removal.
I don't support an effort to invoke the 25th Amendment now.
South Carolina's Lindsey Graham has spent more time with Mr. Trump than nearly any other lawmaker.
Do you believe, after spending so much time with him, that he is mentally unwell, as some of his aides have said?
No, I think he's very frustrated. He thinks the election was stolen. I think he's got some very bad advisors.
In Wilmington, Delaware, President-elect Joe Biden argued the advisors are not the main problem.
He unleashed an all-out assault on our institutions of our democracy from the outset. And yesterday was but the culmination of that unrelenting attack.
Single worst day ever. Still to come, the U.S. records its deadliest day of the coronavirus pandemic in the United States as health officials fear thousands more will lose their lives in the coming days. Plus, Democrats gained control of the Senate this week after winning both runoff races in Georgia. We talk with one of the architects of the movement that helped them pull it off. You're streaming CBSN.
This could be the worst that you've ever seen. Fires are going to get worse, and hurricanes are going to get worse, and they already are.
Firefighters struggle to contain over 600 wildfires.
Do not let go. Thousands of people evacuated.
It's hard to find a place that has not been affected.
This is Hurricane Laura. Behind me, you can see that we are in the eye wall.
Download the free CBS News app to watch. Now getting some insight.
As our nation goes forward,
What do we expect Joe Biden to be doing?
Elaine Quijano goes beyond party lines,
Are there conversations happening about party leadership?
helping you make sense
What's the reality here behind the scenes?
There already is bipartisan consensus
of America's biggest political issues.
How many lives do we have to lose?
We need to keep pressing in the pursuit of a more perfect union.
So good to have your insight. Thank you.
Watch free with the CBS News app.
all the news that you need to know.
Trusted, true journalism.
Because the wind is so strong, there are no airdrops.
When did you start to feel that anxiety?
The best of CBS News. Streaming from anywhere the news is to everywhere you are.
Now they've had to expand to 3 hallways.
Morning news, served just the way you want it.
Here's a look at some of the stories that you may have missed while you were offline.
CBS and AM. Stream free weekdays on CBSN.
Millions more doses of coronavirus vaccines could become available after President-elect Joe Biden takes office. A spokesperson says Biden wants to release nearly all available doses. Aides say the president-elect will share more details of his plan next week. The Trump administration has been holding back half of the available doses to ensure second shots are available. This comes as cases continue to surge across the United States. For the first time yesterday, officials recorded more than 4,000 COVID deaths in a single day. More than 11,700 people have died in the last 3 days. Nationwide, Johns Hopkins is reporting more than 21 million total cases. California, Texas, Florida, New York, and Illinois have all surpassed the 1 million mark. Let's bring in Annette Riboli now. She is a professor of medicine and dean of Cooper Medical School of Rowan University. Dr. Riboli, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it. So these numbers that we've been seeing over the past week, these enormous numbers, are they due to the holiday surge that public health officials were warning us about earlier? And how are hospitals handling these current numbers and preparing to deal with potentially more?
So, yes, some of this is the holiday surge. We had the convergence of Christmas holiday, and we also had New Year's. So we are seeing upticks in cases caused by those. But there's also the element of the seasonality of this virus. So we're solidly in the winter months now with colder weather, with more people going indoors. In California, for example, this surge that they're experiencing, this devastating surge, was predicted by some modeling that was done in the fall. Overcrowded conditions, a lot of people who are essential frontline workers who have to be out and about. So there's a convergence of all of these factors that contribute to these surges that we're seeing right now in different parts of the country. With regard to capacity, yes, in some places where there are large numbers of cases and large numbers of critically ill people, the ICUs and the hospitals are being strained. We're seeing that certainly in California and Southern California. In other areas where the situation is relatively quiet, we are not seeing that.
And Doctor, the vaccine rollout continues to be frustratingly slow. So far, about 5.9 million people have received a shot. What do you think we need to do to ramp up these efforts to get the vaccine in the arms of more people? And do you agree with this idea that we should rush at least the first shot, even if we can't get the second shot? What do you think needs to be done?
Well, let me address the first part. So far, about 17 million doses have been pushed out to the states. Of those, the uptake has been about 5 million. Now, of course, there is a supply and demand issue, but I think one thing that has to happen is as we enter these different phases, and each state has taken a variation on the CDC guidance. So when the time comes to get vaccinated, we need folks to come forward and get vaccinated. I think that that's the first part of it. With regard to whether it's prudent to offer just the first dose and then see what happens for the second dose. There are currently studies underway, and I think we should see what the effect of that is. That might be an effective strategy depending on the vaccine product. But right now, I think as folks come forward, and I think that the states should move through these phases quickly. If they're not getting uptick in one phase, they should move on quickly to the next. It's about, as you said, getting shots in arms.
And Doctor, as we mentioned earlier, President-elect Joe Biden is announcing plans to sort of break with the Trump administration's vaccine distribution plan. So he wants to release all available doses when he takes office. Can you talk a little bit more specifically about the pros and cons of doing that? I mean, is it better to get at least one dose into as many arms as possible, or do we really need to make sure that whoever gets the first dose gets the second dose before we start giving anyone else the first dose?
So I think a strategy like that depends upon the efficacy. So if a vaccine has very good efficacy after a first dose, then depending upon the situation in a given area, if there are a lot of cases and things like that, then yes, that's a very effective strategy of pushing this out and getting as many people vaccinated as possible. But there are other effective strategies. And I said right now, 17 million doses distributed, but only 5 million actually administered. So I think right now we're not getting as much uptake by those who are in phase 1A that we should be seeing.
And Doctor, of course, as COVID cases surge, more and more people want to have access to testing. At-home coronavirus test kits are something that a lot of people have been waiting for. Apparently, they are here now. They are available to buy online. They're not cheap. I've seen some for about $100 a pop. But what can you tell us about the online at-home kits that you know about? Are there concerns about people testing themselves instead of by a professional?
So I think that these rapid at-home tests can be great game changers, quite frankly. And you do your sampling in the comfort of your home. You don't need to travel somewhere, which is desirable if you think you might be infected. You can also self-isolate very, very quickly. So that becomes a very, very effective way to do this. They're almost like home pregnancy tests, in that regard. The issue, though, is depending upon the type, their sensitivity is not as good as the molecular tests. Most of these are antigen-based. It's not as good. So if you come up positive, that's one scenario that allows you to quickly home isolate. If you come up negative, that means that if there's a high index of suspicion that you might be infected, you need one of the molecular tests. And they are not a passport. You still have to use your mask. If you come up negative, that doesn't mean that you can't take precautions and be careful. And these are great. These are indeed a game changer. The other thing is the results are only as good as the sample. So you have to be sure that you follow the directions precisely and take a good sample.
Right.
Sometimes.
All right. Well, Doctor. False negatives, of course. Well, Dr. Annette Raboli, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate you sharing all of your medical expertise with us.
votes eventually counted. I think that it did not help that we were in the middle of a pandemic and that there were Republican leaders who had abdicated their duty and their responsibility to their constituents. And so, people were very clear that there was no cavalry coming and that we were going to have to work to save our own lives, to protect ourselves from COVID, to do what we could to restart the economy, to start these mutual aid societies to take care of one another. And so I think, in particular, Black Georgians and young Georgians, but people of color in general, saw this as an opportunity to save their lives and turned up in massive numbers.
So this election, November's election, saw very, very high voter turnout. And as you pointed out, in the middle of a pandemic. So where do you think this was coming from exactly? And tell us how your organization played a role.
Well, there were, I want to be very clear, so many amazing organizations on the ground and individuals doing work. I can say for our house, for the House of the New Georgia Project, we knocked on over 2 million doors. Again, after deep consultation with public health experts and with our staff and our volunteers, made nearly 7 million phone calls and sent over 4 million text messages in the 9 weeks between the November general and the runoff. We wanted to make sure that every Georgian understood the role, the power of their vote in this moment, and that there was an opportunity to elect Raphael Warnock and John Ossoff as champions who can co-govern with the people, that can help us stop the pandemic and the death that's been a result of it, that can help us restart the economy, and that can help us get back the $1,400 that Mitch McConnell and the Republicans stole out of the American people's pockets with the politics that they were playing over COVID relief.
And so, thank you so much for joining us. Sorry, finish your statement.
No, I was going to say, having high quality conversations with people about things that matter and connecting it to the vote.
All right. Well, Ensate Ufot, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Ahead on CBSN, high-tech manhunt, how police are tracking down the domestic terrorists who stormed the Capitol and what they are learning about the people they've identified. Plus,
footage shows me attacking his son. Attacking him how? Yelling at him? Yes. Okay, I apologize. Can we move on?
The woman caught on camera attacking a black teenager and falsely accusing him of stealing her cell phone is arrested. We've got the exclusive interview of what she told Gayle King just hours before she was taken into custody. CBSN is back.
Mic check 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
media for their partnership throughout this pandemic that we're having. Multiple pandemics, I must say, from COVID-19 to the justice issues we have going on in our country, also with the unrest that we're having right now in Washington, D.C. You played a big part in keeping our families informed with the latest information and updates as we as a community continue to navigate these complexities of this pandemic, very much unprecedented. As you're aware, this morning, MMSD announced our decision to start the third quarter in an all virtual model. We've wrestled with this. We've heard from many individuals on both sides of the argument for returning to virtual and also opening of our schools. I want to stress that even though we will begin third quarter virtual, if at any time the conditions for us to bring our students and staff back safely improves, we will execute our current plan to safely return students in person and have our staff come back in a very much a phased approach that we've been working diligently with many people. We will start with our earliest learners and bring grade levels back in 2-week increments with the hopes of bringing back all students when the conditions are safe. We continue to have safety as our number one priority in Madison Metropolitan School Districts for our students, for our staff, and our family. And we are also trying to make sure we're being responsible to our community. Now at this time, I'm going to turn it over to Tim, who will open it up for questions.
Thank you very much, Dr. Jenkins. We'll turn to our question and answer portion of this news conference. We're going to start with Elizabeth Beyer with the Wisconsin State Journal.
Hi, thanks for taking my question. So what are the district's plans for MSCR care sites and special ed in the third quarter? Will they continue to operate in person with mitigation efforts in place as they have?
Yes, most definitely. Thank you for asking about that. As I've been receiving a number of emails, they really have been about MSCR and also about our commitment to continue with our students, special needs students. So yes, that would be our intent, to keep the mitigations in place. And we've been continuously learning more and more how to do that better. So yes, thank you for that question.
Great, thank you. So how many staff and students in MSCR cares or special ed have been in buildings? How many have been infected, and how many of those infections were traced back to schools?
Okay, I'm going to have one of our other staff members respond to that.
Hi, this is Sally Zerbil-Donish. I'm the Assistant Director for Health Services, and Janet Dyer is also here with me. Janet, do you know exactly how many MSCR staff were working this fall? I don't know exactly those numbers.
Yes, we have around 400 staff working in the CARES programs, including MSCR staff, MSCR seasonal staff, and staff that have been reassigned from other positions in the district.
And I think all of you have access to our data dashboard, and I think there are about 120 positive cases that we've had this fall, and that not only includes MSCR, but that includes our staff in the buildings. So that's nurses, nursing assistants, custodians, IT workers, food service workers, special education. So with that said, I mean, the majority of those cases were brought in from the outside, not from community spread inside the building. So very minimal numbers were attributed to any type of community spread. Just again, you know, with the large number of cases in the fall in the community, we had, you know, just kind of that representation in some of our buildings as well.
Yeah, and once again, thank you for that question, because around MSCR as well, something that we've learned through this process, the impact of closing MSCR on the other virtual learning that's taken place. So we've taken great strides in being very collaborative, and Ms. Dyer and also Nurse Sally have worked closely with our community partners to see how we could also make sure that we have additional support for that. So thank you for asking that question.
We do have, I would add, in terms of the students with disabilities, we have about 335 students with disabilities receiving some form of in-person either instruction or therapy services, and have about 180 different staff associated with that. That could be in the form of occupational therapists, physical therapists, speech and language clinician, and then special ed teachers and assistants and or interpreters.
Great.
Thank you, Dr. House.
Sorry. Okay, cool. Sorry, last question. So education experts widely acknowledge that poor students and students of color are most hurt by being out of school. So how does all online learning align with the district's focus on learning equality?
Well, thank you for also saying that. And one of the things that I'll say to everyone as we've been looking at various pieces of research, some researchers says that children of color are impacted by virtual learning. But there are other also researchers that talk about children of color were impacted prior to COVID-19, and that we had some real gaps that are very much persistent. This whole idea of remaining virtual with the students, all students, the communities that are impacted the most based on the research are the students of color, because a lot of the times they're in multi-generational homes. Their parents are often are essential workers. And so we had to take all those things into account, and not just for the students of color, but just even our medically fragile students and our medically fragile staff. So our hope of continuing virtual right now, and as we're trying to strengthen what we're doing with virtual and engaging those students, and I'm hearing some of our parents saying that they've never had this much contact with staff before virtual. We have some, yes, it's heartening to even see some of the data, not only here, but across the country. But at this particular time, we're thinking health and safety first. And I continue to say this to everyone, we're in the middle of a health crisis here. And we're trying to do the best that we can to manage it through educational logistics, but we are definitely making sure that health and safety is first for all of our students. And I don't know if you recall that we are the district that did too have a student with no underlying conditions to pass from COVID-19.
Great, thank you. I'm all out of questions. Thank you so much.
Sure.
Thank you. We'll turn to Madison 365.
Thank you. My question for you all is, what metrics or measurements will you be using to determine whether or not students can return safely, and how likely is that to happen before the end of the academic year?
Actually, I think it's very likely that it can happen. We're going to just continue to work with our local health department, follow that guidance, and we look at the national data just like everyone else, and we look across the state, but we mostly are concerned with what's happening here locally. And right now, there's an anticipation that there may be a spike coming out of the break. We're going to be looking at that. We're going to continue to work with our internal and external advisory group, which consists of our medical experts, our staff, meaning representatives from the administrative group, representatives from the teachers group. We're talking about our nurses being there on the team. We have a full team that's taking into account what's out there. And if things improve so we can go back to school safely, we are definitely looking to do that. We're opening up third quarter virtual, but it doesn't mean that things can't change. And we're also very hopeful with what we're hearing coming out of the president-elect's intentions of trying to ramp up some of the support that we need at the federal level and the state level to improve our opportunity to get students back in schools within the first 100 days of his candidacy.
Thanks. And will you be following daily positive test rates or the number of new cases? Or?
All of that is included. Nurse Sally, if you want to speak to some of that, please feel free.
We're working closely with with our metrics team, which includes Andrew Stats and Jay Afflet and others within the district. We look at that. We keep really daily records and weekly records of what those numbers are and how those are changing. And we look at those closely and keep track of them. We meet, once a week and, look at that data very closely with our medical experts and internal experts.
And I cannot emphasize enough, if those metrics change, the data changes, we are fully as a district prepared to move towards reopening of schools. If it's safe, we have to remember this is a health crisis and safety is our #1 priority right now for everyone, for students, for our teachers, for our administrators, for our families, and for our community.
Any additional questions from Madison 365?
No, that is all. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up will be Chris Stanford with News 3. Hello, Chris. We'll come back to Chris. We'll move over to Scott Gerard with the Cap Times.
Thank you very much. First question, if the metrics do improve to a level where you feel safe reopening, how much notice would be given to teachers and parents for such a decision?
That's a great question too, Scott, on that. And that's something that we wanted to be intentional why we announced it today, to the 8th. On our last communication that went out, we had told you that we would try to give time, minimum 3 weeks for individuals to adjust. We're going to be looking at this, as you heard us say, we're looking at this really daily, but weekly. We're coming together as a team, and we would communicate this out because we're, as a team, is made up of many people involved with our staff and communicating with our board. And then we will communicate in a timely fashion with the entire community as well. But a minimum of a 3-week window is what we're saying to you. After we receive it, after we observe the data, the metrics aligning with a safe return.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that specific time range. So I know the district does have sort of a lot of metrics outlined on its reopening plan website, and it has the red, yellow, and green markers. Do all of those have to be green? Is that what you're looking for as far as safety when you're considering metrics, or what ones would be okay in the yellow range? What sort of considerations, I guess, is the question.
Yes, when you're looking at our data metric dashboard there, and maybe Mr. Stats also want to weigh in on this, but we're looking for everything to be green. We have some things that are green, just like we've had conversations about the ventilation and building. It's checked off, it's green. But for us to ensure that full safety, we're even having some others come in and check it again. We're checking the water in the building, making sure that we have hot water, just various things that could be on there in terms of those metrics, in terms of the PPE equipment. We want to make sure that we're in great shape to go back. We don't want to leave anything to chance. And Mr. Stats, if you want to add something to that.
Thank you, Dr. Jenkins. And thank you, Scott, for the question. I would say that there's certainly a whole host of metrics we look at, and we look at the entire system itself. I would say that there are very few that would be a standalone red means absolutely not, but you have to have all of these metrics working in concert. You definitely want to see them all green, and that has to be part of the consideration as you're moving forward. I would say that some of the yellow that you do see on the list of metrics is really a function of timing. So, for example, are we going to have floor plans in place? Yes, once we have a better count of students coming back, we solidify the floor plans, then that becomes green. So the yellows you see on here are largely a matter of timing. Symptom screening is another example where a team is working on that and piloting it now. It's simply a matter of timing and would be available at that time. I'll also highlight, because of the changes from public health and their guidance, we do have some updates headed to the website, but it is largely aligned to what we'd already been looking at as we followed public health's lead all along.
And I would add to that too, Scott, as we're listening to public health, as we're listening on a national level to Dr. Fauci, we're listening to Dr. Schaffner out of Vanderbilt, Dr. Joseph out of Harvard, and national experts are saying we can go back to schools. That's the headline. But what they said prior to that is that if all these mitigating factors are addressed appropriately, then we can. So I know some are looking around us and seeing other people. They may have a different situation than we have, and I applaud my colleagues if they have a different situation and they can go back to school. We're not judging them. We're just trying to do what's in the best interest of the students, the staff, the families, and MMSD in our community, and trying to be responsible.
Thank you both. I appreciate it. My final question, I saw on the same metrics page, Andrew, you might be answering this one again, but the survey numbers as far as parent families and then student surveys that went out and interest in returning to school buildings were updated. I was just curious if there will be any more detail from those surveys released.
Thanks for that question also, Scott. Yes, there was an analysis that was provided to the board for their consideration and review Monday night. So we do have quite a bit of additional data beyond those handful of numbers that you see in the website, and those would be available as part of the board packet.
Wonderful. I look forward to paging through it. That's all of my questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Scott. Now we'll go to Caroline Peterson with NBC 15.
Yes, thank you for taking our questions. One logistical question, when you guys refer to the metrics, you guys don't have your own MMSD COVID dashboard. You're going off the PHMDC one, correct?
And thank you for that one too, Caroline. Yes, we are relying on Public Health Madison-Dane County's weekly snapshots. So the numbers that you see reflected in our dashboard as it relates to the presence of COVID-19 in our community, as well as other metrics that we will add around percent positivity, for example, all of those come from public health. We do have, as Sally had indicated, our own dashboard around incidences of COVID-19 cumulatively in the district by location. So we are looking at our own numbers on a regular basis as well. Yes.
And let me just add that those metrics too are part of the whole deliberation that we had, because we did receive feedback from our students, from our families about where we are as well. And all those things too were considered. And let me just go ahead and put this other piece in terms of we asked others to ask other individuals in the community, and we didn't separate that. There was an article in the paper, MTI had done a survey, and we asked them to do it just to get it from their perspective, but they asked a different question than us. Someone had said that our data was different. It was a different question. They asked the question about teachers feeling comfortable coming back. We asked how many felt like they could come back. It was different from our survey than their survey. And anytime you have two different surveys, researchers will tell you, it is about the question. Was it the same? Was it the same intent? And no, it wasn't. So there's no confusion, a division in that. Everyone sitting around the table with us have been there as willing partners. And we take that information into consideration. But in the final deliberations, everything was taken into hand. But we knew that we had some conflicts between some people wanting to come back to school, some people wanted to remain virtual, some of the science itself. It's also slightly conflicting. And Andrew, I don't know if you want to address the metrics that we had initially, too, from our public health. They were different and they changed, and we went more towards the CDC. Andrew, if you want to address that in terms of how it look on our dashboard different now than what it did in the beginning.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Jenkins. And I would say that the reopening metrics team is meeting weekly and sharing information on a much more frequent basis than that. We have administrators out of central office. We've had principals join us. We've had MTI at the table for many of these conversations, especially lately, as well as our experts from the UW. Public Health had originally published their own guidelines around the presence of COVID-19 in our community, and it was a 14-day average and a daily average with specific thresholds. Public Health has with their update, they have no longer publish those thresholds, and they cite various reasons. Chief among them is the mitigation strategies proving to be effective in containing the virus. Also, some emerging evidence around younger children being less likely to be infected or spread infection and transmit it rather, or experiencing very serious symptoms should they contract it. Recognizing, though, that we still have to have a consideration of the relative risk that the community poses with a high level of infection to school buildings. So while we know that those strategies can be effective, if you are operating in a community that has got a large presence of COVID-19, then you may be inviting more risk into your buildings than would be appropriate. So they have referred us instead from their previously published cut scores and thresholds to CDC. And they continue to recommend that districts look at that condition of countywide COVID-19 instances, as well as look at CDC for the guidelines as to where to place those thresholds. I would say that the thresholds are good for understanding relative risk, but I don't want to make it sound like there's a specific cut point at which it is safe and which it is not. These give you perspective and help inform decisions. And following public health recommendation, we're looking to CDC for those guidelines.
Thank you.
And I guess, with that in mind and you guys being able to look at those metrics, how close do you think you are? If things stay at the same trajectory they're going at now and things remain fairly steady, when, is there a way to put any time of rough timestamp on when you could consider a hybrid?
At this particular time, we're going to continue to look at the metrics, and in our community, they have been going down. But as it's said on a national level and on a local level, we're expecting to have some level of a spike. What we've seen also from a logistical standpoint, a number of our colleagues who have gone back to school, and then the numbers spike, and then they had to close down. That's happened around the country. It's happened here, even in our state. And we want to try to make sure that the decisions that we're making, that we can create as much stability for our students as possible. Someone earlier mentioned about the students of color, but I would also say our poor children as well struggle when we're in and we're out. We want to make a solid decision based upon the science, the metrics around it, and also lifting this from a federal level and a state level and a local level. That's guidance. We have to take the guidance and then do what's best for you as an individual district. And that's why you see the makeup of some of our surrounding districts may be different. I was in conversation with several of my colleagues as they have different size districts. And as we were talking, they said, whoa, well, you have a totally different situation. Yes, we do. But I appreciate getting the information from them. They appreciate getting it from me. But when you're talking about a district less than 2,000 or 3,000 versus a district our size and our demographics, those are some serious data points you have to consider when you talk about executing the plan. So thank you for that question.
Are there any other questions, Caroline?
Nope, that's it. Thank you, guys.
Thank you. We move now to Jacob Carb with 27 News. Jacob? I see that Phil Brinkman with the State Journal is in the room. Would you have any questions, Phil?
Thanks. No, I'm just lurking.
Okay.
One of our reporters, Beth Byer, is online. I joined late, so I don't know if Beth has had a chance to ask her questions yet.
Yes, she has.
Okay, thanks.
You're welcome. Other reporters here are indicating they are passing. I'm going to open up questions to the room. Are there any follow-up questions? All right, if there are no follow-up questions, Dr. Jenkins, I'll turn it over to you to thank everyone and close it out.
Yes, first of all, let me just thank you once again, the media, for being here and trying to carry this for us. It's been difficult. We've been pivoting as has the rest of the country and rest of the world during just these multiple pandemics coming across right now. And so we appreciate you helping us getting the message out. It's nothing about MMSD that does not support wanting to get our kids back in school. We want our children back in school. We want our teachers back. We want our administrators back. But just please make sure you carry our message that we're going to keep safety first. And when we do it, we're going to do it in a way to not just go back to school as we were. We're trying to be innovative, working with our staff to ensure once we get back in person, it's going to be an experience that's going to be positive for our children. Prior to COVID-19, we had many students who were not excelling as they could. And so we just don't want to rush back in an unhealthy way and have something very serious happen that we all could have prevented. But our intent, when safe, we are going to move back to school and try to do it in a very robust way so that our students can be engaged, our families can be engaged. And we're also looking already towards our summer experience that we want to have for our 4K students through 5th grade and all the other students that we're going to try to provide opportunities for. But we know this is a tough thing to go through for all of our families, but we want to say thank you for your patience. Those who even want to be back in person, we get it. The social emotional piece is huge with us. And that's why we were uplifted by New York Times, by the work that we're doing right now in our schools in terms of addressing social emotional. If your child is having any issue, social emotional issue, please contact the schools. We've worked diligently to ensure that we have some level of support for our children. This is a tough decision. Been probably one of the toughest decisions in my 30 plus years in education, but I thank you for all of your support. And I thank all of our staff, internal and external support that we've had. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Jenkins. And thank you, everyone, for joining us today.